Copenhagen Street towards Liverpool Road, MP.
Road, we're still towards Liverpool Road, stopping at the
During the 1990s, there was a boom in the radio scanning hobby. It seemed like overnight you could all of a sudden go to a shop, pick up a radio scanner and start listening to anything and everything. The average Joe could receive signals from the ordinary, such as security and taxi firms, to the exciting, such as police radio systems. You could listen to clandestine broadcasts of military and government radio transmissions and the invasive but interesting world of cordless and mobile phone conversations. During the mid-1990s and up until the early 2000s, when mobile phone services and the police opted for digital systems, you could very easily pick up these sorts of frequency books which claimed to tell you everything you needed to listen to. These books were really popular and are still handy for historic reference, but the fact is that they are and always were out of date. As radio and mobile phone technology moved on in the late 1980s and 1990s, radio systems that organisations were using often changed. The frequencies changed and even the modes of communications they used changed, rendering guides like this largely useless. By the time the next volume went into publication, the information was already at least a year out of date. But back in 1989, things were very different. Small notices such as this one started to appear in Shortwave magazine, inviting readers to send a stamped addressed envelope to a PO box in Bournemouth in return for a free copy of a catalogue by a company called SSC. These notices were quite vague and obviously designed to entice people in, and it worked. After a couple of weeks, you'd receive in your stamped addressed envelope a copy of this document called SSC Confidential Plan. What you have to remember is that the radio scanning hobby is in its infancy at this stage. We're in 1989, and between 1987 and 1989 there has been a major overhaul in the UK's emergency service radio communications scheme. There has been a mass migration during this time of police radio systems from low-band VHF to high-band VHF as well as UHF. Joe Public doesn't quite know what frequencies the police force channels are on yet and in what area, and synthesized scanners are relatively new and very expensive. So how all of a sudden was this, as up-to-date as it gets document, starting to circulate? Well, this is where the story gets very interesting. Meet Martin. He spent a lot of time and effort during the late 1980s and early 1990s listening to an elaborate setup of the latest scanners, receivers and antennas and logging everything he heard. Very soon after the switchover of police communications to high-band VHF and UHF, almost the entire country's force, division, channel and frequency information was compiled with the help of friends and colleagues all over the country into a complete listing. Then the UHF frequencies and channels that had been assigned to the police and were about to be rolled out by Pi Communications were also leaked. Martin compiled secret government and national security, Ministry of Defence, military escort and US Air Force frequencies into the SSC Confidential Plan, and by 1990 the document was becoming very popular. It was the first of its kind, you just couldn't get this information anywhere else, and of course it was bound to fall into the wrong hands. Martin got home from work one evening to his apartment, and as he walked into the lounge to check his answer phone messages, he felt something under his foot in the pile of the carpet. He bent down to pick it up and noticed it was a very small metal component, and being interested in all types of communication, he recognised it as part of a GPO telephone or something similar. Martin didn't have GPO telephones in his apartment, but a set of cordless phones he'd picked up from the USA. He didn't think much of this until a few weeks later when he went to pick up orders from his PO box. He arrived back home with a large bundle of envelopes which was secured with an elastic band, and he noticed underneath the bundle a purple slip of paper which had been mostly removed, but written on it were the words, "All mail to this box to room 12 first." He phoned the local sorting office and spoke to the manager who, when asked what this meant, appeared flustered and couldn't provide an answer. It was at this point that Martin realised somebody had been intercepting his mail, and upon further inspection of his telephone, that same person was also monitoring his phone calls. Martin was naturally scared by this and became paranoid going about his daily activities and wondered if he was being followed and what other forms of surveillance he may be under and by who. Soon after came a knock on his apartment door. When Martin opened the door, he was greeted by two men in plain clothes who claimed to be from CID. When they showed Martin their warrant cards, he said he knew they weren't from CID as the ink on them was barely dry. The two men smiled and invited themselves in, and Martin brought them a cup of tea as they sat down on the sofa. As they all sat down, the elaborate bank of radio receivers next to Martin's chair burst into life with the words Panther 1 to Phoenix. The two men looked stunned as Martin turned down the volume and asked who it was they were hearing on the radio. He replied, "You know exactly who it is," and the two men smiled again. It turned out it was Prince Charles's helicopter approaching a landing site in central London. Martin asked what the visit was about, and the two men explained that they'd found copies of the SSC confidential plan in a vehicle belonging to the IRA. They said that they knew from their intelligence that Martin posed no threat and was just enjoying a hobby. He wasn't even making any money from it. They went on to politely warn Martin that no more frequency listings were to ever be published or sent out again to anyone. Martin asked the two men about the phone bugs and the mail interception, but they greeted him and left. After this incident, Martin wisely decided not to continue publishing the SSC confidential plan, and nothing more was ever said until a year later when a friend of his happened to come across a radio monitoring station on a hillside in suburban outer London. The small building seemed abandoned and covered in vegetation, but had a modern video call intercom system on the door behind its padlocked gates. It was covered in antennas with one directional log periodic antenna pointing directly into the financial district in London. Martin's friend, a photographer, took some pictures of the small building and gave the high resolution enlarged prints to him. Martin then decided to send a print to the building anonymously with a note commenting on it not being that much of a secret listening station. A while later, he received the same print back to his home address with a post-it note stuck to it. The note simply said, "That's the building next door," with a winking face.